Organized money.
Please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button so that more people can get exposed to organized money. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Not
really?
her.
Not cinema.
No.
The scales have
You
fallen
can't
from
tell
last.
me.
But
Next thing you're going to say, there's a relationship between MLMs and crypto.
all right, but I want to get into this because I think we're seeing a moment where some of this faith is being pulled at. But I want to go back to that moment, this tipping point where the FTC was after you talked about it. The FTC was kind of after the industry. They were targeting these pyramid schemes. There was this investigation of Amway, and through I think a lot of serendipity. It just so happens that a guy who was from Western Michigan, who was, the in the House of Representatives for 20 years, just happens to become this accidental president, and right at the time where this is important, and he has this huge relationship with the people in his district in the House, which happen to be the DeVosses. So, could you talk about this sort of Amway investigation by the FTC and how Gerald Ford was instrumental in saving not just Amway but the entire industry?
How's that? Simpler ways. How's this legal?
Exactly.
Yeah, both. Yeah, there's different ways of asking both of those questions. So, well, and just a quick caveat that I don't. Ford is kind of like the bigger conspiracy. I actually think so much more of it had to do with anti-FTC sentiment, and that was what I kind of discovered in my research. But anyway, Ford
does
was
all
a big
happen at
part.
the same time.
Yes, it happens at the same time. But
right.
So yes, Gerald Ford was their hometown congressman from the same district in Michigan. And so they've called, DeVos and Van Andel have called him Jerry for years and years. He breaks ground at their like insane right-wing propaganda factory called the Center for Free Enterprise, which puts out like free enterprise versions of like children's stories about the Little Red Hen where like all the farm animals are communists. Like it's really sort of like funny stuff. But they're really like trying to build basically like pseudo-populist propaganda over the course of the 70s. Anyway, so when the FTC goes after Amway for being a pyramid scheme, they have had these other big cases against that company Holiday Magic I mentioned, another one called Costco, and they're basically setting the legal precedent for how to go after a pyramid scheme because, there wasn't anything already to sort of call the plan, right? It was a new type of financial fraud. There were Ponzi schemes, but what the plan did was import basically a Ponzi structure into the direct selling model. And so there wasn't a real, regulators didn't know exactly what to call MLMs that were being prosecuted for financial fraud. And so they were coming up with a pyramid scheme. And they called them chain selling and some other euphemisms as well. So those cases happened in the early 70s. Then they finally file against Amway in 1974. And yes, Gerald Ford happens to become president through a series of, I think they literally have Ford over when they're watching Spiro Agnew step down himself. Like they're watching it on TV, the DeVos and Van Andel families. So it's like a combination of history being totally random and then also, yes, a conspiracy where they've been really laying the groundwork for Ford to be a huge ally. So anyway, there is some stuff about how, they purport to be trying to get Ford to like sign an anniversary Declaration of Independence for this like staged 200th anniversary of the United States. And so there's a record of DeVos and Van Andel, or at least DeVos having like a 70-minute conversation or something with Ford off the books while the FTC is going after Amway. Right. And so that's sort of considered the smoking gun. But the actual decision doesn't come down until 1979 when, Carter is president. So we actually don't have Ford in the office when the loophole is created. And so what I found when I was trying to do my research on this topic, I came across a recent paper by a guy named Luke Herron, who's an academic now at the University of Alabama, who has this paper called The Folklore of Unfairness, which is long and about all kinds of FTC stuff, but really centers on something called KidVid, which
Right.
was, I did not know about deeply enough at all, which was, this backlash brewing against not just the federal government writ large. And it's
But
very,
they still talk about that at the FTC.
Yeah.
yes,
Like,
This is
it's this
100%.
generationally traumatic event. Which
Yes,
is,
and it
like,
was
they're
because
also
they
losers,
were right.
but
They
whatever.
were being constantly hammered for being the nanny state, right? And it's not just the right that's doing this. It's all kinds of advertisers, all types. The entire business community basically came out against the FTC and called them the national nanny state.
But
and
fed
this is
fed by the sort of new right activating the corporate
totally.
America to push back on this guy Michael Pershuk, who
Yep.
was hard charging in a lot of areas. They just picked KidVid as the thing, and that
Yes.
was about advertising to children.
Right. The children's advertising rule.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a justification for going after the FTC at the time. They stopped enforcing Robinson-Patman. So
Right.
the FTC was the FTC's politics was always, we're going to protect small business, and that will be our shield against big business. The Nader people, including Perchuk, were like, oh, screw small business. They're just as bad as big business. No, I don't mean the business you're talking about I'm talking about like local grocers and stuff like that, like
Actual
real pharmacists,
business.
like
Actual businesses.
real businesses, people. And so when the FTC turned on them and said they're just, they're just as bad as big business, they said, fine, we're not going to protect you anymore. And that's when this attack worked.
That's
Yeah,
interesting.
I mean, I think that's right, and Luke does a much better job than me. But there really was this like unprecedented coalition of like the biggest companies in the United States, but also like car salesmen
Right.
and like
Right.
ophthalmologists or whatever. Like it was
Right.
really like a huge mass of people. So anyway, the FTC, they almost pulled funding. The entire agency was under threat, while at this point, DeVos and Van Andel are among the biggest donors to the
Right.
Republican Party. They are huge in this business community. They've activated the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which now has basically a grassroots businessmen's movement where they have, a huge amount of press. And again, a lot of it's really familiar, right? Like they'll find some guy in some, he is a car salesman, or he is some small businessman who shows the like pile of paperwork to comply with some regulation, right? And show how this little entrepreneur is being crushed by Big Brother in the form of whatever federal regulatory agency, you know what I mean? So
And see
these
schemes
stories
that are
everywhere.
funding this backlash. Like that's what's so interesting.
Yes, directly. Yeah. I mean, and they've been, it's DeVos and Van Andel, excuse me, are very much, they're funding right-wing evangelical groups.
And so we should, sure, we should ask that, like, so the ruling comes down, and this ruling specifically gives this carve out. And what does it say?
Yeah, so they, during the long set of hearings, I was going to say trial, it's not a trial, but, it serves as, the FTC presents its evidence, and Amway really just basically gave its own word that it had these rules in place that kept it from being a pyramid scheme. So at this point, there's enough, case precedent to show for these other companies that were shut down that there wasn't really a real retail business to begin with. The Costco company, they didn't even have that product was supposedly makeup. They didn't even have makeup for like the first year in business, right? Like there was enough evidence to shut these companies down as fraudulent. Amway doesn't open its books. It doesn't show the data that would exonerate it from being a pyramid scheme, right? Which is like how much product is being sold? How are people making their money? The government presents its case that, a fraction of people are making even a barely living wage because in fact, they're selling nothing and they only make money on recruiting, and recruiting is really hard. And so in the end, the government basically accepts, or I should say the person that accepts it is a guy named Judge Timoney, who was assigned the case. He accepts that these Amway rules keep it from being a pyramid scheme. So they're like the 70% rule, which is that you have to resell 70% of your retail items before you can buy more. So you're not in inventory loading. You have 10 customer rule where you have to have 10 customers. And then the buyback rule, which is that the company has to buy back anything you can't sell, which you would think would prohibit a company from basically offloading all this stuff to sellers, right? If they can just get the money back. All of it is very easy to get around. They're to this day they remain totally unenforced, right? No one is even watching to see if they're legit, but the government accepts Judge Timoney's decision. The FTC, writes its affirming decision, and the Amway rules are enshrined as the way to run a direct selling company, which eventually is called multi-level marketing. Now we've lost multi-level marketing because it's scammy, so now it's back to direct selling. But anyway, that's really the only regulation that matters. There have been a few cases since that have kind of like narrowed the precedent a little bit, but not really. And then a few more rulemaking attempts that have also tried to enforce some of these rules, but really it's like a giant gray area that is the only thing that has that the government can use to go after bad MLMs, which there's maybe been a handful, maybe a few dozen since then that have actually been shut down because it's really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
Sorry,
okay, so
no problem.
All right, so we got this. We're in the 70s, and unfortunately, this is the only bad thing that happened in the 70s. We didn't see the creation of a whole different way of governing, just this one thing. So it's good for that. But okay, so then you get into the 1980s, and you have this new guy in there, Ronald Reagan. He's not Gerald Ford, and he puts a stop to it, right? Like he just says, no more of this stuff, right? So tell us about Reagan and his relationship with this.
Right. Unfortunately, DeVos and Van Andel have very cannily spent the second half of the 1970s giving a shit ton of money to Ronald Reagan and preparing to, be a huge part of his presidency. DeVos was a member of the so-called kitchen cabinet. Once Reagan is in office, at this point, I think Van Andel in 1981, 83, they helps found the National Endowment for Democracy, which is, this basically pseudo CIA organization that is, quote, doing what the CIA does in the shadows up front. That's kind of its model, right? So like doing all kinds of basically American propaganda abroad. And they continue to, Amway hits $1 billion the year Reagan becomes president. And they just continue to build their influence in the Republican Party.
Doesn't he speak at Amway conventions, Reagan?
He does before. I can't remember if he does during his presidency.
Right.
But speaking at Amway conventions is very common. I think when both Bushes have. I think when Jeb Bush lost, his consolation prize was to speak at an Amway convention. So they just paid him $50,000 or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, they really, Amway then explodes with international expansion. So they are actually expanding across the world, and basically increasing their coffers, which they're funneling directly into all manner of right-wing think tanks, and they're really organizing over the course of the 80s and 90s.
And then let's bring it more to the present day. So what was the Biden administration doing about this issue before, the 2024 election? How were they rethinking kind of the policies around this?
Yeah, so it's interesting, when you track the kind of vicissitudes with each administration, between Reagan and Bush 1, there's not a single prosecution of a pyramid company.
Right.
Or prosecution's not the right word, but you know what I mean. The FTC does not go after a single company for being a pyramid scheme. Then the gears slowly start grinding in the Clinton administration, and they sort of start the pattern of going after the worst and most scammy companies. So if you look up the companies that they went after, they were really blatant pyramid schemes, and some of them are almost funny. I mean, they are funny because they're just so blatantly scammy.
Mhm.
But, then when Bush 1 comes in, he installs very guys who are really openly like against regulation, pretty much. They want the FTC, they think the FTC is doing too much in these areas. And so they pull back. And so the,
I
then the
like that
mandate changes again.
Tim
Tim
Muris.
Muris, yeah.
Yeah. So one of the funny things about reading the book, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm
No,
not
go
that
ahead.
sorry, but
You
I
know more
felt like
than
as
me.
I was reading it, it's this whole alternative history of like so I think a lot about antitrust and like, this is not antitrust, right? But it's the same regulators, right? It's the FTC. And so it's like the same villains, right? But from a different, like, so like, of course, Tim Muris, who like now works for Amazon or like
Of
writes
course.
papers for Amazon, he was of course doing like speaking at Amway conventions or I don't remember, but he was on the payroll of Amway or
He
whatever it
has
was.
he's been hired by Amway before, and other companies, I believe
He
too.
was like the demigod of right wing antitrust. Like they all were like, oh, Tim Muris, he like is the guy who really started the hospital merger program. I mean, he really very important guy. Like, I mean, it's just like so funny because it's just like the villains. I'm like, oh yeah, that's a villain. Oh, villain. Yeah, villain. Oh yeah, villain. Yeah, no. But they're like, oh, this is what they're doing on pyramid scheme.
So yeah, there
Right,
was this like
different
kind
villainy.
there was kind
Yeah.
of this 40-year dormancy period for the FTC. And then, I mean,
Yeah,
just
and
to
there
take it
were
to the
right.
present day,
Yeah, so there were
then what
attempts,
happens?
right, at rulemaking, which is, the way the FTC is going to try to do anything with this is, they can't undo the precedent, unfortunately.
Mhm.
A lot of people want Congress to pass a pyramid law, but that's obviously its own, total morass. So there are rules, though, trade rules that could very much bring MLM in. One is the business opportunity rule, which requires somebody soliciting financing for what's called a biz op. They're subject to all kinds of disclosures and rules about how they can do that. They have to give you time to consider the offer, all this stuff. MLMs were exempted from that rule when it was first passed in the 70s. And so then they try to expand the rule. It starts in, I believe, the Bush administration, goes on and on as a rulemaking can through 2011 when it finally is made, and the MLM lobby basically gets a grassroots letter campaign going, and convinces the FTC to exempt MLMs because all of these small business people will be overly burdened by the rules and they'll lose their livelihood and all this stuff. So in 2021, the FTC tries again with the biz op rule, but then also I think in 2022 introduces another rule, which is something called an earnings claim. So that would really regulate something MLM recruiters love to do, which is say you can make $1 million in whatever year by doing this, right? Like they
Right.
say the craziest stuff to get you to do it, and no one regulates it and no one cares. And so they would be hugely impacted by that rule. So they got the rulemaking going, ANPR, all the Magnus and Moss rules that indicate how to do that, and then we lost that administration and those regulators.
In comes an administration led by a president who was involved with MLMs, right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes, and
Trump has been involved with them.
yeah, there hadn't been, there wasn't a ton of direct, I would say, Maureen, I'm forgetting Trump's FTC commissioner.
Olhausen. Yeah.
Olhausen.
This
So
is the
she
only
was
place where you can get answer to that really quick.
She's like a villain. She, but she was only acting. She was really bitter, by the way, that she was never
Right.
made permanent. She was so mad about that.
Right. So she's much more like, I think, so we didn't even get into Herbalife, which is, the basically just round 2 Amway, right? Where Herbalife gets away with the business model is completely unscathed and they're just fine. But this idea that this business model exists, that persists, unfortunately. And so right after that, I think Maureen Olhausen.
Olhausen, correct.
She very directly, like in an address to the DSA, is like, "Oh, we're not worried about that. We're not worried about this. Like, you guys are fine. Don't worry about it." Like, Andrew Ferguson has not been so directly positive about MLM, I don't think. Unfortunately,
There was a lawsuit. There was a lawsuit that they filed against Eovia.
Yes,
a really bad. What I've been told is that Lena Khan's FTC did all the work on that case.
Yes,
and they just put it out.
Yes, that's very true. That was started in the previous administration. But again, going after scammy ones, like the Bush administration did that.
Yeah, it's like a one-off, right?
Yeah.
It also contributes
matter,
to this dynamic, which we started off with, which is we have to distinguish between the good Ponzi schemes and the bad Ponzi schemes, and then about Ponzi, you know. But like so I think going after the scammy ones, you know, you should do that. But also, like, they're like, well, this is, you know, it just struck me. I wanted to mention something that I saw. Again, speaking of, like, I'm focused on antitrust. I looked at the House put out appropriations for the FTC, and they have these provisions where they're like, you're not allowed to spend any money doing this thing that I generally think is good. And so they have lots of these riders. They're called riders. And one of them that I didn't pay attention to because I didn't know what it was says that none of the funds made available by this act can be used to finalize or enforce the trade regulation on the use of earnings claims or the review of the business opportunity rulemakings.
Yes.
So I was like, oh, okay, now I know what they are.
An incredibly specific provision that somehow found its way.
Right. How that got in there.
Imagine.
Yes. So, there are lots of ways that they've been maneuvering to make sure, I mean, that even whatever regulation does possibly happen to come their way, that they've protected themselves no matter what. And of course, like, even so when Lena Khan was trying to go after MLM, what's interesting is that the DSA, right, its bedfellows were not merely other scammers, right? Because at the time, of course, Lena Khan was doing all kinds of federal, action, including antitrust stuff that was making a lot of people mad. So DSA was joining like the American Hospital Association or the American Retail Federation or all kinds of
I just love that it's DSA.
Lobbying groups.
Yes,
the other DSA. Right. So like, this idea, and that's, brings me back to what I think everything has in, not everything, then I sound really tinfoil, but like so much of this business world has in common, because it's not correct to say that all of these businesses are pyramid schemes. Just like it's not correct to say that Social Security is a pyramid scheme or a Ponzi scheme, which Elon Musk loves to say, right? But there is a shared culture of impunity and of the desire to self-regulate and of the desire to remove what little oversight we do have of how private enterprise works and what happens with those profits, like where they go, all of that, right? MLM has this incredible, little charmed existence where like it's fraud and no one cares. And now, because of the way the tax code has been manipulated, thanks to DeVos and Van Andel, they also get to hold on to so much more of that money, right? Like S-corps, that's how they structure their empire. And the DeVos family was hugely instrumental in doing that. Then, Betsy DeVos becomes the education secretary. She wants to get rid of the education department, so that MLMs can actually that's the business model, right? It's like, little family empires where the children basically work for the MLM and are taking public funds to do religious education. That's what they want.
Well,
anyway.
So let me ask you a bit, sort of a broad sort of question about this, because I wrote a piece about Sam Bankman-Fried, and one of the things is when you listen to Sam Bankman-Fried before he went down for crypto, like for the scheme he was running, he talked about the different innovations he was doing, and it was obviously bullshit. But the thing that was kind of remarkable about it is that he sounded exactly like every other business person, and it isn't because he was really particularly good at disguising anything. It's because, not business person, but like leader to an investors. Like they all like business culture is now oriented that way. So like if you're running Pepsi, right, you don't give a shit about the sugared water that you're selling. You're talking like a finance guy, right? And like one of Europe's largest asset manager in 2022 said that private equity it has Ponzi-like characteristics, because what private equity funds are doing is they're selling some of their portfolio firms to themselves. Like they raise money to sell their own portfolio firms to a fund they also control, right?
Continuation fund, they call
right,
it.
continuation. So one of the things that's like going on here is that it's not that no one cares, it's that it just sounds like everything else. So here's the question for you. Did this MLM, like I asked you about Amway, the American way, right? And it has this totally alternative vision of America, and it's this alternative form of politics. Did this stuff, did this rhetoric, this sort of liberty to scam rhetoric, did that come from MLM and get into the business world? Or did it come from sort of parts of the business world that get into MLM and what is the, I mean, we didn't even gotten into crypto, which is very MLM-like characteristics.
Yes,
like
very.
Where did is this the origin story for that kind of like scammy rhetoric that like encompasses you with this worldview that you can't get out of because you can't listen to negative information?
I mean, what a small question.
Right. No, it's just kind of like.
No, I mean, I think, it is chicken and egg. Again, I think, when I've tried to answer this question, because I really, at the end of writing this book, I felt like I was also just writing a sort of new history of the last century, that it was, and it goes back even further if you really think about some of the deeper roots, like even positive thinking, right? It comes from New Thought, which is much further back than the books we were talking about. So there's just
Dutch Calvinism, exactly.
Herbert you can go much
Dutch
deeper,
Calvinist.
and I think unfortunately, to me, it is very much in the roots of the founding of this country. Not to again be overly dramatic, but just bear with me. MLM is, if you accept that it exists, right? Because there's also sort of, we have to parse, like, do you think MLM exists as it operates or purports to operate, which is like that it can actually function without being a pyramid scheme, or do you actually believe what it once said about itself, which is that it can go on forever, right? That's really the logic. If you actually think MLM is not a fraud, you have to accept that there will always be more markets and always be more customers, and that everyone has an equal chance, and that it's not lunacy. So there's this like incredible, I would call it delusional, but you could also just say it's an optimistic vision of not just a market, but a country, of like constantly expanding customers.
I totally
Perpetual
disagree.
growth.
I completely disagree with that, because if you think about, like, what was one of the first laws passed by every single colony and then new states? It was a law against usury. Right. This is what happens when you take God out of that Calvinist tradition, right? And anything is fine, right? Well, I vehemently disagree with you.
Well, I don't mean to say all Americans thought this, right? But
I know what you said.
I don't
actually think there's anything to do with the founding of America in this vision. This is totally antithetical to the idea. Like the idea
would you accept the friendly amendment that it's about a refounding of America?
Well, yes, of course, it's a rival vision. I don't think
it's a rival vision.
It is wild that this has become like a sort of rooted in America. Like to me, it's just completely antithetical to everything.
Let me put it this way. I'm not saying, again, by our roots, I mean sort of what David was saying, which is that there has always been an impulse towards expansion as the way that people are going to find deliverance, right? Like in writing this book, I looked up, like, where's the first iteration I can find of be your own boss? And it's from a newspaper in like the 1830s. And it's a guy who's traveling up some river out west. And he's like, here, you can be your own boss. It really is about like expansion, and
there's a manifest destiny.
Yes, absolutely. But I mean, because it's about an untapped market. Just
let our guests talk.
I mean, there were kings, right?
But what is MLM? MLM is the opportunity to be your own little kingdom. It is true. Right. It truly is. And what are the Amway families now? They are dynasties. You can give your Amway business to your progeny. It is very much inherited wealth. At its core, in MLM, there is nobility, essentially. There is truly, it is passed through wealth at its most literal.
Nobility is part of a system of monarchy, right? So the point here is that like the idea of sorry, I don't want to because I
What
love
I'm
this book
saying
and I
is
love what
that
you're saying. I'm just like
if American democracy, and I find it very noble, let me just be clear, the idea is that that system is inherently unequal and that we have a democratic system where every single person has certain, inalienable rights and equal protections under our laws, right?
Yeah.
That these people for a very long time have wished to undermine that and instead propagate the idea that actually you can prospect your own wealth and hold on to it and give it to your family and essentially create your own totally unregulated little empire.
Let me push back with last point because this is I know I really love this stuff and I think it's really important. The idea of wealth is a contested one, right? So I think the core premise of the MLM sort of framework is that wealth is you envision it. It's you said it's fraud, right? And I think that that's one vision of just like whatever you can grab, whatever you can extract is one way to understand wealth. A different way to understand wealth is if you can make something that people need, if you have knowledge to build, something that people want, and if you can grow crops on land, that's another vision of wealth. And I think these are contested notions. I do not look at something at its extraction as wealth. I look at it as extraction, whereas I might look at something like someone who is farming or someone who is making something and trying to sell that or has a little bit of property. Like I think fundamentally a little bit of property is a way of protecting yourself and protecting your liberty. But what you're talking about is not necessarily property. You're talking about sort of almost a form of like not indentured servitude, but you're extracting from others. And I just think that those are not. I would contest that as a. I don't think that's wealth. I think that's extraction.
But it gets to a real question, and again, whether what you're talking about, whether people have been able to create wealth in that idealized way where someone is performing a service or do basically creating a good and getting paid for it and that is like the way that that's useful to society and doesn't involve harm. I think there's a lot of historical evidence that harm that a lot of people have made a lot of wealth with a lot of harm, right? And whether anyone has actually been able to, whether that, what you're talking about, that interaction in its most idealized form, how much has that powered the wealth and productivity of this country versus interactions where people are being defrauded or exploited or harmed, right? And people who are willing to do that are kind of winning out. I mean, I think this is a great, this is really kind of, and that's what we talk about when we talk about MLM. It's like, do people know that they're being exploited?
Right.
That's like at the heart of the question of like when people don't really have empathy for people in MLMs,
I'm going to cut off this very interesting debate and say that Bridget won.
No.
But I want to ask just one last question here because I do think it's really important to bring this into literally the present that we're all experiencing right now. I mean, typically, one way that these schemes fall apart is through this loss of faith. When the people at the bottom of the pyramid say, "Hey, wait a second, we're getting screwed here," and that faith rumbles up to the top of the building. And I sort of am seeing that in the Epstein scandal. It's going to be hard to be optimistic about the Epstein scandal, but I'm going to try. Like,
I think it's hilarious. I love it.
The whole influencer economy that sort of built up around hyping up this scandal on the right is in itself kind of a pyramid scheme. Like a lot of these podcasters, not just because of what they sell vitamin supplements and stuff like that, but because they're presenting a vision of the world, a vision where elites are corrupt and disgusting. And when the person who they've entrusted to stop all of that is entwined in the scheme, there's this loss of faith in this kind of ecosystem through people, who have been invested in this kind of Epstein-centric view of the world in a way. And do you see parallels here, or am I insane?
No, yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of it is just that they're the same people, right? Who are hawking various oils and all things
Right.
like that. But yeah, I mean, when MLM really got going, it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s when the technology actually changed and allowed this self-help, the like promotion side of it, the
Mm,
coaching side of it to explode. Literally, like the ability to create cassette tapes. I mean, the biggest Amway
yeah.
downlines were like these booming self-help cassette tape operations. And
Right.
now, unfortunately, with podcasting, with social media, it's like infinitely even easier to do
Right.
that. And the people that are in Amway now, they're being induced to join these apps where they're required
Mm,
to read a book on a PDF, like listen to an audio, basically buy this stuff on these apps.
mm,
And so it's a huge part of the ecosystem. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, why is Donald Trump such a good avatar for MLM? Because he relies on promotion entirely, right? If
right.
we want to talk about real business and even, a business like real estate, which I have a lot of negative things to say, but at its base level does purport to provide a service, which is housing, or making a building, whatever. Like, can't even do that. There's nothing real. This idea that like that you can build an identity as a business person but not have actually materially created anything of value, and even successfully like generated wealth from that. I mean, I think that the right-wing creators and this whole creator economy, they really do like the promotion is the thing that feeds the others, right?
Right.
There's not
It's the
really
ethos.
necessarily right, and there's not
And
really a
it's like
business
when that
model,
breaks and
you
when
know
that breaks down, when like what they're selling is actually, oh wait, we don't believe in that anymore. Like it just feels like that could fall in on
Yeah, I
itself.
I see it both ways because, obviously the coercion in this environment is also really strong, and that positive
Sure.
thinking and like tune out everything negative. And this, MLM does have, it's a strong man system. It always has a really strong figure at the top, and each downline has a strong man at the top too.
Yeah.
And so when there is
And
that
the positive thinking
pressure,
is
that
like its own defense mechanism.
100%, yeah, you
Yeah.
you really are just, I mean, I think it's sort of scary, but these people, many of them have been conditioned to block that out. So I'm not sure what will make it in. I mean, I think it would be great if it was,
But there is this
Epstein.
revolt. I mean, there is kind of this from below, like this, hey, you told us that we were going to see these files and yada yada. There is
Right.
this kind of weird rumbling that's going on. It just
Well,
feels very
and
I
interesting.
also
hope so.
there's you know there's also like a what's the alternative, right? I mean, the alternative here is a a shitty political system that doesn't deliver, right?
Right,
So
right,
so
right.
like because the alternative, one of the things that struck me in your book is that when people feel like a sense of love or confidence for the first time, like it's a big part. The celebratory parts of it are huge, and the emotions that they have, the idea, oh, this is the first time I've ever felt like I could do anything.
Right.
That's a big deal. It's like almost a religious experience. And even people that got scammed later on, they're like, it was still great. I'm glad it happened. Um, that is very much like what happens in a union organizing fight or in when you're at a startup and you're doing something and it's
Hmm.
meaningful or whatever it is. Like there's lots of ways to have that experience. Um, and it's like we don't have places to have that experience in ways that are good for society right now.
Hmm.
And the New Deal provided that experience for a lot of people in different ways, um, a lot of different institutions. And so I think one of the revolts against this is like the vote for Zoran Madami, right, in New York, which is just a statement like we want real politics again. And we don't know what that looks like, but we don't know what he's going to do or whether but like there is this sense that like the real answer to multi-level marketing is a coherent functioning society and a real politics that can help
It's
build it.
Yeah.
solidarity. Yeah, it really is like feeling like you have a common goal and you're able to contribute. And I think that's why Epstein, like if you think you're a soldier in the fight against the global elite pedophile ring, like
That
you're
is a
really
form of
contributing.
solidarity.
You
Right.
are valued, and you're
It's
That's
something
what
greater
that's
than
what these
yourself.
ML,
Yeah.
these MLLs were giving to these people that you were writing about was a sense of solidarity, even though it was extractive. And I think so. That's like we have
It's
not
like, where's
seen.
there the solidarity that's productive? Like where does that come from?
That's kind of like so. So I think that's the question isn't whether there's going to be a revolt
All right.
against these. It's sort of whether there will be an alternative that will.
Right.
Anyway, I loved the
Right.
book. I thought it was great.
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's a good enough book that we spanned like oceans of time here in terms of history.
It's hard to zero in on, like there's a lot covered. So I think you guys did a good job of.
Well, Bridget Read, thank you very much. It's a great book. Go get it. Little Bosses Everywhere. And thanks for being on the show.
Thanks so much.
All right, that was awesome. Ben, are you good?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bridget.
Matt, I think Matt thinks I hate the USA.
I don't think that.
I don't think so.
I don't think that. So. I write a bit.
No, Matt is very protective of the founding.
I want
principles
fire
of
and
the founders.
brimstone. I want fire and brimstone. That's what we're missing.
Like, no, but I think there's I could have a whole conversation. I think that what's so interesting about MLM to me is like the abundance conversation and this idea like
nice.
Oh man, we
infinite wealth.
Why didn't we do that?
Oh, that's so. She's totally right.
Keep going. Why not?
All right, let's do it. Let's do it.
I think
let's ask that question. So, do you see any links between like MLM culture and this new sort of abundance kind of school?
Well, when you're talking about the commonalities between legitimate business, the legitimate business world, and MLM and the rhetoric, why all business kind of sounds the same. To me, it is this constant talk about growth, and that we can have abundance despite lots of evidence that material abundance is in fact not happening, that we're actually running out of all kinds of resources, right? And that there might not be infinite returns, like in the way that many businesses have structured themselves, so that success is always predicated on like something coming next, right? Some kind of deal, sale, IPO, whatever it is, right? That there's this like infinite growth. I mean, I think, and that's really like, that's the kind of heretical thought that is like the core of MLM, is that it can go on forever. And yet we dismiss that as fraud. And so I just think it's a really interesting tension.
There's also the deregulation bit, right? I mean, they're
100%.
saying that we can achieve this additional growth if we just get rid of this thicket of regulations that is holding us back. I mean, that's at the core of the abundance sort of.
I would also say, I think that there's a religious aspect to abundance that really, a positivity to it. Like, I think actually the culture of it is actually not dissimilar, right? Which is like, if you think about like the opening of the opening of the book was like, we're going to have like robot things.
You wake up and
pill.
it could be out of like an MLM.
But at no point are like
you wake
friends
up and
at no point are friends or family involved. It's like the opening chapter is like this sci-fi
I don't know.
utopia.
My mom kept recommending abundance book to me.
Right. Maybe it can bring those family bonds, but there's a point to that.
The regulatory thing that really is the thing that I find, we didn't get into crypto at all, but there is this overarching logic that regulation holds back innovation, that regulation is slowing down the productivity we need, and that we can unleash. And the abundance, the project, the book is very much supposedly about the material needs for survival, right? Housing primarily, right? We're not talking about like getting everyone a yacht, but like that truly, if we want to actually provide the basics for the most people, that we're going to do it by unleashing growth through, getting rid of this red tape. We're seeing it everywhere. After the fires in California, what are we talking about? We're talking about red tape. We're talking about using AI to hasten permitting. Like, to me, that is very much goes into fantasy territory. The idea that again,
Mm-hmm.
my life is gonna be better because I've allowed some private company entity to do more,
Yeah.
to kind of increase their own abundance, that it's going to get to me. I just think
Yeah, and it's very
yeah,
individualistic too, right? I mean,
very much.
this idea that well, this to relate it to crypto, this is going to let me become well. This is going to give me that big truck that I wanted to buy. If we just change the system better, it can work to my advantage. And that's, there are similarities to if we just think of a different kind of economy where I can become a seller, then I can have the dreams that I've envisioned.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to imagine a future where we reap those benefits by tearing away at stuff we've already done, right? Rather
Mhm.
than what horizons can we reach by doing a lot more difficult work that
Or
involves cooperation and the solidarity we talked about, right? Like,
and shared prosperity and things like that. Yeah.
exactly. It's so much easier to think that these things have been holding us back because they're overly centralized, or they're right, that there's some office somewhere where there's some guy at a computer that's the reason that I'm suffering. That's so much easier mentally and so much more seductive than the idea that we
Well,
might have
Right.
to truly reorganize, you know?
well,
Yeah.
I
Totally.
would, I have, I'm not sure I agree, but I have a different way of shit talking abundance, but we'll get to that eventually.
All
Um,
right. Fair enough.
and
All right, Bridget. Thank you so much. This has been great.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
All
I
right. Cool.
love the work both of you do, so this is fun.
by the
Awesome.
way, so we got to tape, we'll tape the intro and outro, but one of the
Yep.
things, Bridget, I think was really compelling about your book just is like, it is a history, and I've never seen that history written anywhere. And I feel like, you didn't rely on much academic work. Is that because there just wasn't any?
Yes. Overwhelmingly, MLM, like what's out there is based almost like it's from anthropology departments and sociology departments
Mhm.
and gender studies departments, and it's really interesting, but it's all about the like current sellers
Right.
and the psychology of it. And it's like,
Hmm.
there's one academic book on it from the 90s, and unfortunately, she just takes wholesale the MLM industry's own history of the business model and doesn't even look into it. So it's
Yeah.
sort of just like, yeah, it's like they're just everyone just started with this sort of clean slate, that except this guy Bob Fitzpatrick, who's amazing and
Right.
just like a true
There's always
crank.
there's always that's who actually knows everything.
I'm gonna
Right?
send this to.
There
I'm gonna
always
send
is.
your book to a friend who runs a Columbia. He's a Columbia historian, and he's sort of like a. There's a
You
school
talking
for
about
the
Richard
history.
John?
Yeah, Richard John, a history of capitalism sort of tradition in academia. He respects journalists. So I'm going to send this because there's no, this is good history. I thought it was good history.
I
So
mean, and I truly, I did not set out to write a book that was I thought I was going to get away with so much, doing so much less, and that it was going to be much more contemporary. But I just,
Hmm.
I just couldn't.
History
I
is really rich.
once I realized that there was no like first draft of this, I was like, oh, no
Yeah.
one has just even tried to look at this stuff and just figure out what happened. So it became
Yeah.
like Kim Phillips Fine's book as Invisible Hands is like truly what
Mm.
opened reading it at the same time that I was like doing the older history stuff. I was like, oh, there's
Yeah.
just so many parallels here that no one's looked at. But anyway, but I appreciate that because I felt really out of my uh wheelhouse. I'm not a historian, certainly. So
I was jazzed during that conversation. I was like amped up. And the reason is because this book answered so many questions for me about modern politics, right? And I've like deal with MAGA people in my day-to-day sort of
Hmm.
job at doing political hackery. And it like doesn't that world doesn't totally make sense to me, right? And then I read this book and I was like, oh, this is totally the culture of
Right.
that world, right? Which is this kind of like it's marinating in distrust and using and exploiting populist arguments to engage in forms of extraction. And I was like,
And also
oh
using
yeah.
and also sort of it leverages people's belief in themselves, right? Everybody sort of at heart thinks about this idea of, yeah, what if I got rich? What if I, I mean, it plays off certain American dream type tropes, even if it's not totally connected to America at its founding, because I don't want to set you off again. But it does play off these tropes of what if I could direct my own future? What if I could, envision this better life for myself? And it does this in an extremely exploitative and cynical way. And politics has that function. Sometimes our modern politics has that function as well.
So I agree with that. I agree with what you're saying. And one of the things that I was like spending some time thinking about the Jeff Epstein scandal, which, when Trump comes out and says, oh, I'm not going to release the Epstein files, it's this huge political dispute, and we'll see where that goes. But I was trying to figure out, like, why is the Epstein files the thing that his people were like, he's lying about this, right? And it's like, he said a couple months ago, pharmaceutical prices are going to drop by 80% immediately. And like, of course they didn't. And no one's like, he was lying about that, or like any of the other things that he said that are just like not true. They didn't care. But this thing was the thing that they cared about. And it's like, why? And I was like spending time really trying to understand it. And there's like a bunch of like right-wing podcasters and people who've been, not just right-wing, but people who've been talking about this Epstein story. And they're funded by the equivalent of vitamin scammers, and like all the ads are like this kind of type of business. And I'm just sort of thinking, well, this is the culture of QAnon. This is the culture of that MAGA world. And there's aspects of progressivism that are here too. So it's not like totally, a right-wing thing, but that is where like the beating heart of that kind of political organizing lives. And those groups they live for conspiracies. They live for these elaborate stories that never get resolved, because that's sort of the point of that ideology. And so when I look at the Jeff Epstein thing, I'm like, oh, this is a kind of political get-rich-quick scheme.
But
and
it's
so when Trump says, no, that's not a thing anymore, it doesn't actually work even for him.
Right. And it's also about this loss of faith. Like I often find myself bringing up this episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus. And it's a sketch called The Conjurer. And he's a magician, and he can build a block of flats with his mind. And the way that the flats stay up is if everybody living in them believes in it. And if they stop believing in it, then the flat comes crashing down. And that, I feel like, is what's happening. Like the guy on top who conjured up this whole scheme in his mind is telling you, and they don't believe him because they've been bought into it. And that's what's bringing the whole block of flats down. And that ultimately, I mean, they call it a confidence scheme for a reason, right? People are confidence men because they, when you stop having confidence in what they're saying, it ruins the scheme. And so ultimately, I think that's what's going on there. And it's what's going on, it's what happened historically with MLMs that have fallen apart.
Yeah, and that is right. And one of the things that's a little bit different maybe about my politics than maybe Bridget's or yours is I have more sympathy for conservative thinking. And I'm more sort of like, I'm a little bit more conservative, I would say. And, the thing that is so powerful about these multi-level marketing arrangements or pyramid schemes or whatever is the feeling of solidarity that people have within them. And that is so powerful, that feeling you belong to something bigger than yourself. And I think that's
it's what cults are about.
It's what cults are about. It's also what healthy
it's also what political
are
parties are about.
Yeah, I mean, people need to feel a sense of meaning. And I think a lot of the people who are in these arrangements are unhealthy in some way, or maybe they're not, but like,
and people more and more have derived their meaning through politics, and specifically with respect, if you're talking about the Epstein stuff, they've derived meaning through being part of a group that is trying to move these elites out of the society.
That's true, but also these MLMs rip through evangelical communities too. So there's something particular about evangelical communities and like Black religious communities too, where these schemes rip through them. They don't go through communities like ours, which are just like,
Herbalife was huge in Latino communities. I mean, and very connected to the church in some ways. So, yes, I think all of this. I mean, I think this is why this is such a good book, because it calls up so many different aspects of our life in something that maybe we didn't think about a lot, which is like Amway distributing.
Right. All right. Well, next week we're going to have another episode of Organized Money. And I thought this was really fun, I got to say.
Yeah.
In the meantime, if you want to support what we're doing, go to organizedmoney.fm /subscribe and put your email in if you want to give us a little bit of money so we can pay for our wonderful production company, Rock Creek Productions. So it sounds good. Please do that. And if you've already done that, thank you so much. It's super helpful. We love doing this, and we love hearing from you. We love your support. And next week we'll have another great episode.